Alright, real quick, this is kind of a stupid thing, but I did a ranking video, which is different from a tier list video, kind of, for the playables in Rise 2, and I felt that it would be, interesting to do a tier list on the bosses of the game. This tier list will also include the mini-bosses and any weird form things. We'll get to that. The only boss that's excluded on this tier list is Resurrectus, as Forest is just the face of that fight in general. So Resurrectus isn't down here, but I'll talk about him when it comes time to talk about Forest. These are in alphabetical, by the way, so it goes Bone Crusher, Calculator, so B, C, D for Damien, etc. So it's not in the order you fight them in, obviously, but whatever. Alright, so I'm going to try and do this in order, though. Now, real quick, just before we continue, I'm going to say that compared to Rise 2, at one point I thought about doing this, doing all of the bosses together from both Rise 1 and Rise 2, but then I realized that the Rise 2 roster would decimate this roster completely, so that didn't really seem fair. I'll be judging a boss based on how good it is compared to the other bosses in this game, not how good it is, period. So an S tier boss wouldn't be an S tier boss by Rise 2 standards, or by any other game standards. So anyway, let's start with Damien. I'm going to go ahead and put Damien in C right now, just because I feel like he is the best basis in the game, as he only has 2 moves. He has that 3-hit combo thingy that barely counts as a combo. It doesn't even count as a combo. And the dash move, where he dashes, hits a wall, and then dashes again 3 times in a row. The reason I'm putting him in C is because he's not held back by any of the hitbox problems Rise 1 has, but he's not interesting other than that dash move. I'm actually going to bump him up to B because I feel like that dash move does give him something over some of the other bosses, as it is visually striking enough. In Rise 2, that dash move got neutered, unfortunately, but it gained a projectile in its place, and his basic melee also got neutered. So there's an argument to be made that Rise 1 Damien is better than Rise 2 Damien, and I could potentially agree with you on that. Let's see, next would be Regulus. I'm going to put Regulus in C because he is 100% dependent on what character you pick. If you pick Pon or Monty, you're going to win. If you didn't get hit the screen before and got the Beezer, you're going to win. If neither of those circumstances are true, I guess their Nubarok too as a projectile, but if none of those things are true, then you'll just have to wait. It's not a difficult fight. You literally just have to wait, and then the time he's open after doing the slam is very long. It's also kind of dumb how it doesn't tell you that him swinging that around will damage you, because it doesn't even look like an attack. It's just he has contact damage always unless he just attacked. That's how Regulus works. But once you know that, I think Regulus is a decent fight, and I feel like he's actually really good as an introduction to mini-bosses in general. Now next up is Sumer. Specifically, Sumer Phase 1. Now at version 1. Sumer's the only boss who has a completely different fight in Dark Mode. They don't share any of the same sprites or anything like that. It's weird. So this only has Sumer's neck because I couldn't fit all of them. Anyway, where would I put Sumer? I'm going to move Damien down to C, and I'm going to put Sumer in B. The reason for this is purely the Restoration update. Pre-Restoration Sumer, I think, is a downgrade from Damien, but that bite attack he has adds something to the fight, where I think he's just barely better than Damien. Sumer used to be my least favorite boss in all of Rise 1. That has changed, kind of. We'll get back to that, because Sumer 2 is down here. I'll get to him in a minute. But, yeah. Sumer's now a boss I don't dislike at all. I think he's an okay boss. And for a Stage 2 boss, I'm going to give him some leeway, because Stage 2 is kind of a gauntlet in Rise 1. So I feel like Sumer being overly difficult there would be a really bad thing. So him only having 3 moves, which is 1 more than Damien, is fine. If this was base game Sumer before the Restoration update where he got that new move, he'd be in D tier or bottom of C. But I feel like he's good enough to be here. I'm actually going to move Damien up to B. Again, I just think that Sumer is better than Damien mechanically because the fight has a flow to it versus the Damien and Regulus fights where it's just waiting. Whatever. So next up on the list would be Chaos Minion. I'll get back to him in a minute. I'm going to rank Chaos Minion and Sentinel together, as I feel like that's an interesting discussion. So we're going to move on right to Usurper. Yeah, that's not a difficult thing to like think about at all. You see, Usurper's not held back by Rise 1's janky hitboxes, because almost all of his moves have AoEs, and therefore if you translated him over to Rise 2 or any other Maximus game, the same thing would follow. Those big AoEs would still be a thing. The hitboxes wouldn't change at all. He doesn't have a basic attack. If he did, it honestly would hurt the fight. But all of his moves have long windups. The laser can get a bit funky, but other than that, all of his moves have long windups. They're fairly easy to dodge, and they do a lot of damage, meaning you get punished if you screw it up. I feel like the fight has a really good flow to it, better flow to it than Sumer does. And other than the laser being funky, I feel like this is just mechanically the best fight in Rise 1 because it works around the janky and chunky hitboxes. It would literally be as good in Rise 2. It would literally be no different, other than the jump and laser being a bit iffy. The slam would be essentially the same. The jump would be almost the same, and the laser would have to be reworked a lot because again it's janky, but whatever. Let's see. Now that we can talk about these two together, okay. So Chaos Minion and Sentinel were made to be together at some point. In the conceptual stage, they were thought up as having complete movesets so they could be fought separately, but the fight in Stage 5 is the one that, they were built for. And the thing is, that fight in Stage 5 is not good at all. Now, when I was making the game, before the game actually dropped, that was the hardest fight in the entire game, and I neutered it just because it was broken. Having two mini-bosses on screen at the same time who act completely independently of each other and don't have move timers like Regulus does essentially broke the game. So I removed one move from them each, and that worked fine. Now they weren't just doing roll. Now Sentinel wasn't doing a jump constantly or a roll. Those two moves are almost the same thing. So now since one of those timers was removed, I can't remember which. Since one of those timers was removed, and since Minion's other move that wasn't removed is proximity based, it meant that the fight actually became pretty fair, but was still easy. I still think that's the second best fight in Stage 5 because every other fight is a refight, verbatim, other than decreased health, I guess. But now let's rank them separately because honestly the separate fights are better. I'm going to put Sentinel in C tier, and I'm going to put Chaos Minion in, let's see, here. Now, Chaos Minion is interesting because, that dash move is not really unique to him, but the fact that it's proximity-based, that's a thing all over the place in Rise 2. But having a proximity-based move, other than basics, is not a common thing in Rise 1 at all. And having that dash move be proximity-based is pretty cool. The Shockwave move, even though it's taken directly from, the Bettys from BM2, is also a unique move. The basic sucks on Chaos Minion. It leaves him open for so long. But whatever. And then Sentinel is just kind of an iffy fight in general. Like, the fact that he has projectiles instead of a basic is kind of neat, but both of his other moves are virtually the same thing. Just with slightly different hitboxes, so I can't really rank him higher anyways, and unlike Regulus, he doesn't really have a unique flow to him at all. Like, if you removed one of those other moves, he'd be the same. If you removed the other one of those moves and kept the other one instead, he'd be the same. So, like, those two moves are completely swappable, and just make the fight less fun because he'll alternate using them, which is not really a thing a mini-boss should do. And I think he's the sole reason that fight in Stage 5, when they had access to all their moves, was broken in the first place. The weird thing is, later, after I did all the balancing tweaks, and Restoration came around, in Dark Mode, I took their stage versions, put them together. They weren't broken anymore, so all the things I did before Restoration fixed that. And I literally have no idea what fixed it, but I'm not going to complain. Now, before we get to Schlurgle, which is going to be interesting, I'm going to rank some of the other bosses. Oh, wait, I still have to rank Forest. Forest would go in A tier, I guess. I don't know if he'd be better or worse than Minion. I'm going to put him worse than Minion for now. Might come back to that later, but it's close. Forest has one of the most unique fights in the game by proxy of, indirect fighting. You have to fight Resurrectus. The issue is he only has one move, but he can alternate between walking and running depending on how close you get to him. So again, that's a proximity-based thing. I'm pretty sure these are the only two bosses with proximity-based moves, so they're similar. I'm going to put Forest above Chaos Minion here because I think Forest has the more unique fight, as in there's not a lot of fights like it. Chaos Minion definitely has one of the better movesets in Rise 2, but Forest is definitely a more unique fight overall, even though his moveset is very limited. Alright, before we get to Schlurgle, I'm going to rank the rest of these goobers. Bone Crusher, that's a D tier boss. Now, Bone Crusher has one move, period. And it's a very, very plain move. It's just a basic. I think mechanically he is the most boring boss in the game because he has one move. The only reason I'm not ranking him higher or lower is because he's intentionally, lower in general, he would never be higher, is that he's intentionally a tutorial of sorts, pseudo-tutorial for the ally system. One ally always spawns the same wave as Bone Crusher, so that lets you know that they exist your first time around going through Endless. That's part of the reason why Bone Crusher is as simple as he is. So I'm not comfortable putting him in F because he has a reason to be so terrible. Alright, Lithidus. I'm going to talk about Lithidus and Calculator at the same time because they're interesting. So both of these bosses have quite a large moveset, but you forget that they have a big moveset because a lot of their moves are similar. Lithidus especially because he's visually uninteresting, although I think his moves themselves are more different than Calculator's. Calculator has one projectile move, and then almost all of his other moves are just different variations of the same melee. Versus Lithidus, who has two charges, and then a stomp that has a good hitbox for once, and then two more melees. So these two bosses are very similar. Not in terms of what their moves are, but in terms of how they work. They both have a large amount of moves for some reason, but diversity-wise, not a lot. I'm going to put Calculator in D tier, just because there's an ally with you, making the fight completely trivial, and you can literally just watch it happen. And I'm going to put Lithidus here. Do I think it's better than Sentinel? Probably. Sentinel and Lithidus have similar problems of them being, having just moves that are very similar. But Lithidus has a wider move pool overall, so I think that that I'm going to give it to him. I do think he's worse than Regulus, though. Alright, Kinfeeder. So, in Dark Mode, Sumer has an alternate version that appears instead of him, with a completely different sprite and completely different moves. F tier boss. His arm slam move literally does not work. He doesn't have the minion summoning move the original Sumer had. The fireball is unchanged. So he's the original Sumer, but neutered, and one of his moves literally can't hit the player, and sometimes it does randomly and does like 50 damage. Alright, now we move on to Schlurgle. Schlurgle's interesting because Schlurgle has a lot of problems, but mechanically, Schlurgle is the most diverse boss in the entire game. Every move from Schlurgle feels unique in some way, so I'm going to give Schlurgle an S tier. If he's not S tier, he's high A. He's better than Forest, I think. Forest mechanically has less problems for sure, and I could definitely see people saying Forest is the best boss in the entire game because he has the least flaws. But Schlurgle is mechanically diverse. None of his moves really feel similar, other than both of his projectiles, but the context of them is completely different. One's a randomized burst of projectiles, the other's a homing shot. Other than that, his other moves are completely different. So, yeah, Schlurgle from a mechanical standpoint, all of his moves are diverse from each other. And difficulty-wise, he scales pretty well as the final boss. I could see the argument being made that Usurper's harder than Schlurgle. Personally, I don't agree because of how large Usurper's wind-ups are. The only issue with Schlurgle is the wind-ups, in the sense that he doesn't really have any. Thankfully, you get healed beforehand. Stage 5 is full of healing items, so as long as you don't goof it on Usurper too bad, you should be fine, but still. So overall, I'm pretty comfortable with this tier list. I feel like I agree with it. This right here is probably going to be the spot that gets the, that's the most divisive. I could see people putting Sumer all the way down here. I don't see anyone putting Sumer above that, but I could see people putting Sumer all the way at the bottom. That's really all I have to say. I'll probably do the exact same thing as this when Rise 2 comes out, and once all the Rise 2 DLC is finished, I might even put both sets of bosses together, and you'll see all of these guys drop even further. I think there's literally only one boss in Rise 2 that would be below B tier on this ranking. Maybe 2 or 3. In main stage bosses, no, not at all. I think Damien is very similar to here, so he'd be B tier. But every other boss, main boss, would be A or S if we're following the same criteria. But it'd be a completely different ranking, so I guess Damien would be D or C in that list. Just for reference. And that's it, I guess.